Juniper by Monica Furlong, Chapter 11. I was woken by a voice saying insistently, "Please wake up, I want to talk to you." With a start I came to, saw sunlight brilliant on the white walls of the room, and could not think where I was. I turned my head and saw a girl about my own age, a very pretty girl sitting cross-legged by the bed, watching me intently. She had long fair hair, braided, falling down over her shoulders, and her eyes were a vivid green. "Who are you?" I asked in surprise. "Truin," she said. "I live with Angharad. I'm a sort of apprentice. Didn't they tell you about me?" It seemed useless to explain that Uni had never told me anything, so I simply smiled at her. "I'm longing to talk to you," she said, full of eagerness. "Angharad said you were a princess." I must confess that I felt pleased that Truin was obviously impressed by this, but I still felt too shy to launch into a long description of my life. Do you sleep in here too?" I asked, seeing the other bed disarranged. "Yes, it is going to be nice having you. I was longing to wake you up and talk to you when I got home last night. I was out looking for a plant Angharad needed to make a dye, but she wouldn't let me wake you up." Truin paused for a moment. "Are you hungry?" I nodded. She got up and went out of the room, and for a moment I caught sight of her lovely profile and long neck. It was she, not I, who looked like a princess, I thought. I lay back, propped on my pillow, still quite tired but enjoying the warmth of my bed, the simple lines of the room, and the fact that for the first time in months I was to have a companion of my own age. In a little while Truin was back with an oat cake and a drink they make in those parts by fermenting the whey of milk. The good plain taste of the oat cake, delicious like all Angharad's cooking, and the fiery warmth of the drink put new energy into me. While I ate, Truin asked about Moon and tried to talk to him, but he blinked stupidly at her. I climbed down the ladder to the room where the two Dorans were sitting in front of the fire together. Uni, usually so pale, looked a little flushed from the fire. She looked up at me, saying, "Tomorrow I will travel north. I will be gone for 2 months. Angharad will teach you in that time." The pleasure must have shone in my face, because she said rather crossly, "I hope she won't spoil you too much." "Nonsense," said Angharad. "She's a sensible girl, and she and Truin will be company for each other. Come back and fetch her in the spring." I think my obvious preference for Angharad must have rankled Uni. The next day I walked a little way with her on her journey. Then she stopped. "Go back now." She hesitated. "You think I am hard on you, maybe that I do not care about you. I can only be a Doran in the way that is natural for me." Uni waited, as if she were trying to say more, but could not manage it. Then she kissed me roughly on the cheek, turned, and marched away. I was touched by her speech, but I could not wait to get back to Angharad and Truin. One of the reasons that Angharad had offered to keep me for a while, I think now, was that she believed Uni was starving me and she wanted to feed me up. The food was generous and delicious, and she encouraged me to enjoy it, occasionally saying things like, "Young girls need proper nourishment," which I took to be an oblique criticism of Uni. Not that I felt she disliked Uni. "You have one of the most remarkable Dorans in the country as your teacher," Angharad said to me one day, when she and I were out gathering docks to make a green dye. "How do you mean?" I asked with bitterness. What is it that is so remarkable? Among the Dorans, we speak of people having power, you know. We don't mean power like kings or popes have power, of course, but power to bring things back into a sort of harmony, like tuning an instrument that's gone flat. And Uni can do that? I said disbelievingly. In a most unusual way, yes. She sees to the heart of things. There was something I wanted to say to Angharad, only it was difficult because it felt disloyal. She's very hard on me. Angharad was silent for a long while, and then she said, Did Uni ever tell you the story of her life? I shook my head. When Uni was a little girl, a tiny little girl, her parents were killed in a raid. Some of the tribes were very brutal in those days. They didn't just take cattle and crops. Some say Uni's mother was killed in front of her, that she escaped only because she was hidden in the roof of the barn, but that she peeked out and saw what happened. 2 or 3 of the children were left, but their house was destroyed and they had nowhere to go. They lived as they could, roaming the countryside, orphaned and homeless, begging food or work here and there, sleeping wherever they could be warm. Uni's whole childhood was like that. Only when she was 14, a famous Doran called Freni took Uni in. She was starved and sick like a little wild animal in winter, but Freni was gentle with her, and slowly Uni became strong and well. I know this, Angharad gave me her sweet smile, because I was Freni's apprentice, and Uni and I were sister Dorans in training, just like you and Truan are. Freni reckoned, she went on, that Uni was the best pupil she ever had. And as you know, good Dorans are made by good teachers. You will be a good, perhaps great Doran, partly because Uni trained you. But she doesn't train me, I said obstinately, although I was very moved by this tragic story. Child, said Angharad slowly, and there was a long pause. Open your eyes. When we were back in the house, we boiled a vat of the dock leaves with vinegar, and I pushed skeins of white wool into it. Without the vinegar, what is called the mordant, Angharad said, the dye would run as soon as you washed the wool. It is the biting acid that makes the color fast. It was brave of you to leave home to go and live with Uni. I know what Uni's housekeeping is like. You must have been frozen as well as hungry. The pleasure of Angharad's sympathy made it possible to swallow my resentment. It was rather cold, I admitted, but I wasn't really brave. I just couldn't help myself. Also, I know that Uni has something to teach me, if she only would. Angharad turned and looked at me. Perhaps you think learning to be a Doran is like learning French or mathematics, but it isn't. It's quite different. But I've only got a year and a day, I reminded her, and so far I haven't learned anything. Well, after today you will have learned how to dye wool with dock leaves. Later, when we fished the shining green skeins out of the vat and hung them over the storehouse wall to dry in the sun, I had a sense of achievement, but thought, it's nothing to do with being a Doran. Although Angharad fed me properly and kept me warm, she expected me to work hard. To begin with, she taught me how to tease wool, the process of preparing it for spinning. I learned to pull the wool off the fleece, take out the dirty and tangled bits, part the wool between my fingers until it was of even texture, and then comb it into delicate little rolls. It's the preparation that counts in spinning, Angharad said. If you are lazy about that, you will never spin an even thread. Then she showed me how to knot some thread onto the spindle, and spinning it between my feet, twist the combed wool onto it while the spindle revolved. It was very difficult at first because the thread kept breaking and going into lumps. It was nothing like the perfect even thread that Angharad made so rhythmically. I persisted, though, and eventually, to my great pride, a cone of spun wool rested on the spindle. Then, instead of letting me whirl the spindle between my feet, she took a spinning dish on the floor beside me, and I found I could spin much faster and more easily than before. I was delighted at first. Then I got bored and began to spin more carelessly, wanting to be done with it. The result was rather poor. Angharad did not scold me. She simply expected that I would go on practicing. "Wool is a living thing," she said once. "That is why you cannot spin wool from a dead sheep." Watching her spin, I noticed how, as she joined one piece of wool to another, the little hairs of the wool clung together to make a strong thread with no trace of a join. As we teased the wool plucked from the fleece, I suddenly saw it with new eyes, noticing the tiny black flecks of peat in it and the yellow waxy substance that made my hands soft. As we carded it and made it into long webs of wool, I felt its softness, its delicate strength. Angharad's long, slim fingers, twirling the distaff and making a fine, even thread, made it seem almost as if she spun it out of herself. I caught myself trying to match her rhythm, to move into the kind of easy concentration that produced a thread without lumps, but I kept finding that I either tensed myself and squeezed the unspun wool so hard that it would not flow properly into the thread, or that I pulled the threads out so far that they thinned and broke. It was more difficult than I had thought at first. "It's how you feel, isn't it?" I said to Angharad one day in a moment of insight. "That's what makes the evenness of the thread. You need to concentrate, yet not notice that you're concentrating." I suddenly remembered what she had said about learning to be a Doran being different from learning French. "Do you think spinning could be helpful in learning how to be a Doran?" I asked. Angharad laughed. "It's exactly the same thing," she said. I frowned. How can it be the same thing? Every old woman sitting spinning on her doorstep knows how to do this. They're not all Dorans. No, not all, but don't underestimate their wisdom. When you are wise, it won't make them stupid.